25-year-old English woman Caprice Buddle invited a man she'd been flirting with to a house in Waterlooville, Hampshire on May the 5th of 2019. The man had been chatting with Buddle on a consistent basis and even met her in person several times before the day in question. However, upon their arrival at the property, the victim, who was in his 30s at the time, was robbed, tortured and assaulted by 37-year-old Sean Perry. Over the course of multiple hours, official reports on the matter described how the unnamed victim was hit over the head with a stool, kicked and forced to consume cleaning fluid before having his phone, wallet and bank card stolen. Perry then blindfolded the man and drove him around for an undisclosed period of time, after which he was dumped by the side of the road. The victim subsequently ran home and contacted the police, who located Buddle at a house in Havant that same day and took her into custody on charges of conspiracy to rob, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and possession of a Class A drug. Following a trial at Portsmouth Crown Court, Buddle was found guilty of the offences levied against her and was consequently jailed for 10 years. Perry, meanwhile, was arrested several days after the incident. He ultimately pleaded guilty to a plethora of charges, which resulted in him receiving a prison sentence of 17 years. Number 14. The crimes of Khalil Wheeler Weaver. 20-year-old college student Sarah Butler was back home in Montclair, New Jersey over Thanksgiving break 2016 when she suddenly went missing. Some of Butler's friends subsequently logged into her social media accounts and discovered she'd been communicating with an Orange resident by the name of Khalil Wheeler Weaver leading up to her disappearance. In a bid to catch the man they suspected of kidnapping the young student, Butler's friends and relatives set up a fake social media profile to attract Wheeler Weaver's attention online. They then arranged for an intimate rendezvous with the man using the fictitious character they created. When he showed up for the meeting, however, he was detained by Montclair police on suspicion of being involved in Butler's disappearance. The young woman's remains were ultimately found hidden beneath tree branches in Eagle Rock Reservation. It was determined that she'd been fatally strangled with her own sweatpants, and the individual responsible for the murder was identified as Wheeler Weaver. In the aftermath of his arrest, it emerged that the man, who was in his early 20s at the time, had lured at least 2 other women into deadly traps in the months leading up to Butler's slaying. Back in August of 2016, 19-year-old Robin West was spotted getting into a car with Wheeler Weaver. Within the next few hours, she was fatally strangled, and her body was later found in an abandoned house in West Orange that had been set on fire. About a month later, the remains of Newark woman Joanne Brown were found in another abandoned house. She too had been strangled to death by Wheeler Weaver, according to subsequent reports. One of the women he'd targeted, later identified as Tiffany Taylor, woke up in the midst of his attack and managed to escape with her life. In 2019, despite maintaining his innocence, the man was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and desecration of human remains, 2 counts of aggravated assault, attempted murder, aggravated arson, and kidnapping. He was consequently sentenced to 160 years behind bars. In March of 2022, Wheeler Weaver faced criminal charges in connection to a 4th killing, that of Mawa Dombia. The latter's remains were found in May of 2019, but weren't positively identified for more than 2 years thereafter. Number 13. Jared Lovison. Australian man Jared Lovison vanished without trace on April the 16th of 2020 after telling a friend that he was going to meet a girl with whom he hoped to have intimate relations. His whereabouts remained unknown until 5 weeks later, when his body was found in bushland in the Moondara State Park in Victoria's Gippsland region. Court records revealed that in the weeks following 37-year-old Lovison's disappearance, the police had uncovered a nefarious plot involving a friend of the man's named Samantha Guillermi. The latter allegedly took advantage of the victim's reported desire for intimacy with her to lure him to the remote area where a pair of co-conspirators planned to teach him a lesson. Guillermi's co-accused were identified as her boyfriend, 28-year-old Jake Brown, and 49-year-old Andrew Price. who'd reportedly been feuding with Lovison over his relationship with a woman whom the victim had previously dated. In the early morning hours of April the 16th, Lovison rode his bike to the area where he believed he was meeting up with Guilherme. However, as the pair was sitting in a car smoking cigarettes, Brown and Price ambushed an unsuspecting Lovison with firearms and led him into the nearby bush, where they forced him to consume a lethal dose of the depressant GHB. In the wake of her subsequent arrest, Guilherme claimed to have been under the impression that Brown and Price simply planned to beat Lovison up rather than kill him. In December of 2022, however, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was scheduled to be sentenced in February of the following year. Brown and Price, on the other hand, each faced murder charges in connection to Lovison's death. They both entered pleas of not guilty and were scheduled to stand trial in May of 2023. Number 12. Zayed E. I'm going out now. I want to kill my first one. I'm excited. Wish me luck that it works. That was the alarming text message received by friends of an 18-year-old German woman identified only as Sarah M. in May of 2021. 5 days earlier, the young woman had reportedly purchased a knife that measured roughly 5 inches in length. She had set up an online dating profile under the fake name Domina Cherry, which she'd used to arrange a meeting with a man named only as Zayed E., who was 39 at the time, on the day of their date. The same day Sarah sent her chilling text to her friends, Zayed picked her up from her home in Bavaria. As the pair were driving along, she allegedly produced the blade she'd recently bought and plunged it into the man's neck. A physical struggle ensued, culminating in Zayed wresting the weapon away from his date and stopping the vehicle. Due to his severe wounds, he eventually fell into a coma and passed away at the hospital 3 weeks later. Less than an hour after the initial altercation, Sarah was taken into police custody in the town of Ebermannstadt. In the wake of the incident, investigators learned that the suspect idolized infamous serial killers such as Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez, both of whom were featured in pin-up posters on the young woman's bedroom wall. Sarah had lured Zayed on a date that night for the expressed purpose of killing him, seeking to emulate the mass murderers she revered. In court, the judge admonished her for her lack of remorse, noting, "It is extremely rare for a perpetrator to kill a person out of lust for murder." The defense team emphasized Sarah's age as well as her history of drug abuse in an attempt to mitigate her punishment. In the end, she was sentenced to 12 years in a socio-therapeutic facility. As the sentence was being announced, Sarah held up her hand to reveal a pentagram, mirroring the actions of Richard Ramirez during his 1988 murder trial. Number 11. Olly Stevens. An English schoolboy named Olly Stevens agreed to meet up with a girl at Bugs Bottom, a field near his home in Reading, Berkshire, shortly before 5 p.m. on January the 3rd of 2021. Upon arrival, however, Stevens was ambushed by a pair of teen boys who proceeded to launch a physical attack on him. At some point during the altercation, one of the assailants produced a knife, which he used to stab the victim twice. The two boys subsequently fled the scene, along with the unnamed girl whom it would later emerge they'd tasked with luring Stevens to the field in order for them to harm him. An off-duty nurse who happened to be walking her dog near Bugs Bottom witnessed the stabbing and subsequently rendered aid to the wounded teen until the arrival of emergency crews. Paramedics performed CPR on Stevens for half an hour, but he ultimately died while being transported to the hospital. About 2 hours later, one of the boys responsible for the fatal attack admitted his involvement in a text to another teenager, writing, "It was me and my boy. I started slapping him up, and then my boy backed out and then shanked him." The other suspect called the stabbing the biggest mistake of my life in another text, claiming it was done out of pure anger. Investigators subsequently learned that the assailants had targeted Stevens in connection to a previous disagreement. The victim had reportedly seen a Snapchat video in which the two teens in question had humiliated a younger boy. Stevens tried alerting the young boy's brother, which angered his attackers and set into motion the events that ultimately led to their deadly confrontation at Bug's Bottom. Less than a week after the attack, the suspects were identified and arrested by Thames Valley Police. They were both charged with murder and perverting the course of justice, while the girl who'd helped lure Stevens to his death was charged with manslaughter. In the summer of 2021, following a 5-week trial, the two teens were found guilty of murder and consequently sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, with minimum terms of 13 and 12 years. The girl admitted her charge and was sent to a young offender institution for a period of 3 years and 2 months. Number 10. Oklahoma Cannibals. In October of 2020, criminal charges were filed against a pair of Oklahoma residents accused of luring a man to their cabin in the woods for an illegal gender reassignment surgery. The LaFleur County Sheriff revealed during a subsequent press conference that 53-year-old Bob Lee Allen and 42-year-old Thomas Evans Gates had been arrested for the predatory scheme which they'd allegedly orchestrated in an effort to satisfy their cannibalistic urges. The 28-year-old victim, whose identity wasn't disclosed, had volunteered to undergo the drastic procedure after encountering Allen and Gates online while researching castrations. On the 12th of October, the man flew from Virginia to Dallas, where he was picked up by the suspects and driven to southeast Oklahoma for the surgery. Allen and Gates allegedly laid the victim down on a makeshift table in the remote cabin, at which point the procedure commenced. The patient reported being awake during the duration of the 2-hour surgery after being injected in the needed areas. He identified Allen as the one who performed the removal itself, while Gates served as his assistant. After the surgery was completed, the men allegedly admitted to being cannibals and also indicated they planned to eat the victim's removed genitals. Allen further claimed to have a freezer full of human body parts and even showed the man pictures on his phone as proof. After Allen said he'd bury the victim's body in the woods if he died on his watch, he drove the man to a hospital in McAlester to receive treatment for the excessive bleeding he was experiencing. Medical personnel were reportedly informed by the patient that the two suspects had tried to get him to participate in the cannibalism. Hospital officials got in contact with local law enforcement about the unauthorized surgery, leading to Allen and Gates' arrest on charges that included conspiracy to commit unlicensed surgery, performing unlicensed surgery, and maiming, as well as assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Their bail was set at $295,000 each. Number 9. Rachel McCrow, Matthew Arnold, and Alan Deere. 4 Queensland police officers were dispatched to a remote Riambilla home on December the 12th of 2022 to conduct a welfare check on New South Wales school principal Nathaniel Train, who'd supposedly gone missing. When they arrived on the rural property, law enforcement announced their presence by honking their horn. The officers subsequently moved closer to the house, at which point they were met with a barrage of gunfire. A pair of young constables identified as Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold were immediately slain in the ambush attack, while the other two, Keely Bruff and Randall Kirk, were left fighting for their lives. A trio of assailants emerged from the home and confiscated the fallen officers' guns and radios while continuing to fire at their fleeing colleagues. Despite having been shot in the leg, Kirk eventually managed to get back into the police car and drive away as bullets continued to shower down around him. Bruff, meanwhile, ran into dense shrubland and successfully escaped. However, in an attempt to lure her back out into the open, the killers set the brush ablaze and continued pursuing her for 2 hours until she finally made it out. Consequently, a neighbor named Alan Deere, who'd emerged from his home after seeing smoke billow from the property, was fatally shot in the back. In the end, the 3 assailants were killed during a shootout with Queensland Police's elite CERT officers. They were subsequently identified as the purportedly missing Nathaniel Train, his ex-wife Stacey, and his brother Gareth, whom Stacey had married following their divorce. It was determined that the trio had purposefully lured the police to their isolated property with Nathaniel's fictitious disappearance for the expressed purpose of ambushing the responding officers. investigators learned that the trains had set up a sophisticated surveillance network to aid them in their bid to murder as many police officers as possible. In the shocking incident's aftermath, more and more details emerged regarding the train's increasingly disturbing behavior, which had prompted students to leave the schools they taught at in droves. Number 8. Roxanne Innis. At around 7:30 p.m. on March the 8th of 2022, Texas woman Roxanne Innis heard a knock on the front door of her Baytown residence in the 3100 block of Ohio Street, near Louisiana Street. When the 55-year-old grandmother stepped outside, she was met by Demir Ricardo Ferguson, who claimed to have sideswiped her car. Unbeknownst to Innis, however, a man armed with a gun was lying in wait on her property. He eventually emerged and fatally shot the woman in the head, then fled the scene with 18-year-old Ferguson in tow. 2 days later, the police released video footage taken from the victim's Ring doorbell camera, which appeared to show a man dressed as a woman pacing on the front porch in the moments leading up to the shooting. Tipsters swiftly identified the individual in the security footage as Ferguson, who'd fled to Cincinnati, Ohio in the wake of the incident. Law enforcement tracked him down and arrested him. He admitted to purchasing the disguise and luring Innis out of her house, but denied having been involved in the shooting itself. Ferguson said he'd been given $200 by the gunman, whom he called Mr., to drive to the location and set up the ambush. Ferguson also revealed that he'd been given $15,000 to keep quiet about the crime. He was charged with murder and tampering with evidence, the latter of which stemmed from the fact that he'd disposed of floor mats with DNA on them. 2 months later, in May of 2022, a man by the name of Leland Williams was arrested and charged with the murder. In an odd twist of developments, his motives remain unclear and unknown to this very day. Number 7. Phoenix Police Ambush. Early on the morning of February the 11th of 2022, Arizona man Morris Richard Jones III dialed 911, claiming that his wife had been shot by an intruder who'd broken into their home near 51st Avenue and Broadway Road in Phoenix. When a responding police officer approached the man's residence a short time later, he was invited inside before being shot in an ambush attack. Although the policeman reportedly sustained multiple gunshot wounds, they weren't ultimately deemed life-threatening. Backup officers were subsequently dispatched to the scene and surrounded the home, with Jones still barricaded inside. A tense 5-hour standoff ensued, during which a man emerged from inside the house with a baby in his arms. The individual placed the infant on the ground and then approached law enforcement with his hands above his head. He was taken into custody without incident and reportedly cooperated with investigators. Jones, meanwhile, remained inside the house. As officers attempted to retrieve the baby, the gunman opened fire on them. The police returned fire, but several officers were left injured, either by direct hits from Jones or ricocheting bullets and shrapnel. When the police were finally able to gain access to the home, they found Jones dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Shatifa Lobley, had reportedly been gunned down by the suspect before his call to 911. In total, 9 Phoenix officers were injured in the ambush attack. Number 6. Grindr Conspiracy. Beginning in December of 2017, 4 co-conspirators from Texas targeted multiple victims for violent crimes by luring them through the online dating app Grindr. According to a Justice Department press release, the suspects specifically sought out gay men who they'd arranged to meet at an apartment complex in Dallas. Upon their arrival, however, the conspirators would hold the victims at gunpoint and drive them to ATMs around town, where they'd force them to withdraw cash from their bank accounts. One of the suspects, identified as Daniel Jenkins, later admitted to creating fake online dating profiles with the intention of robbing individuals they perceived to be gay. At least one of the reported victims was physically harmed by the group, and another was allegedly carjacked. Furthermore, Jenkins revealed to investigators that he and his accomplices had regularly used homophobic slurs during their encounters with victims, and a member of the group had even tried to abuse one of the targets. Each of the 4 suspects pleaded guilty to a slew of charges, including 1 count of conspiracy to commit hate crimes, kidnapping, and carjacking, as well as 1 count of use of a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. Jenkins was ultimately sentenced to 23 years in federal prison under the plea agreement. Co-conspirators Michael Atkinson, Pablo Geneseros de Leon, and Darrell Henry received prison terms of 11, 22, and 20 years respectively. Number 5. Michael Lopez, Justin Yvicura, Jorge Tigre, and Jefferson Villalobos. A 17-year-old from Long Island, New York, was arrested for luring a group of teens into the woods on April the 11th of 2017 as part of a planned gang attack. The suspect, identified as Lenise Escobar, was an admitted member of the infamous international crime enterprise known as MS-13. She reportedly went by the nickname La Diablita, or Little Devil. On the day in question, Escobar convinced 5 young men to meet her at a park in central Islip to smoke marijuana. Upon arrival, however, the victims were ambushed by more than a dozen other MS-13 members who unleashed a brutal attack with machetes, knives, an axe, and tree limbs. Michael Lopez, Justin Yvicura, Jorge Tigre, and Jefferson Villalobos were each killed in the onslaught, while Alexander Ruiz managed to escape by fleeing on foot. While investigating the matter, the police learned that the MS-13 members who carried out the attack were under the impression that the victims belonged to a rival gang. At least 2 of the slain teens had uploaded pictures on social media in which they were holding up MS-13 gang signs, which the group perceived as an act of disrespect. In the incident's aftermath, Escobar attempted to eliminate any evidence of her involvement by throwing out a blood-stained sweatshirt and tossing her cell phone out a car window while being followed by police. More than a dozen MS-13 gang members were criminally charged in connection to the violent ambush. In April of 2022, Escobar was found guilty of racketeering, conspiracy to murder rival gang members, obstruction of justice, and murder in aid of racketeering, which carried a maximum sentence of life in prison. Number 4. Marcus Olmsted. On the night of December the 26th of 2018, Marcus Olmsted received a message on Instagram from a young woman he was talking to, who arranged for them to meet outside his home in Muskegon County, Michigan. When 20-year-old Olmsted walked out to his driveway, however, he wasn't met by the woman, but rather her boyfriend, Naoki Stephen Bull, who proceeded to shoot him with a crossbow. Although the victim's father and stepmother were inside the home at the time, they believed their son had left with the woman he was expecting and therefore weren't aware of his critical condition. Olmsted was found by his twin brother about an hour later. When emergency medical crews arrived, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The following day, police tracked Bull down to his girlfriend's house in Grand Rapids. During the questioning, the young man reportedly admitted to firing the crossbow in the direction of Olmsted's house, but denied having shot the victim directly. Investigators learned that Bull had purchased the crossbow bolts at a Newaygo County ammunition store several hours before he lured Olmsted outside for the ambush attack. It was determined that the shooting had stemmed from the 2 young men's mutual romantic interest in the woman Bull was at the time still dating. In August of 2021, Bull agreed to a deal with prosecutors under which he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was subsequently sentenced to spend between 20 and 70 years behind bars for the crime. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and maybe it will be your video that we'll be doing next. Number 3. Ashley Bocanegra. In the afternoon of August the 11th of 2022, Georgia mother Ashley Bocanegra was lured to an apartment complex in Beaufort, where she was confronted by a pair of women. What ensued was a physical altercation, reportedly witnessed by a neighbor, in which 30-year-old Bocanegra was savagely beaten by Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez. who also stole her cell phone. The victim was subsequently taken to the hospital with injuries that included fractured ribs and punctured internal organs. Due to the severity of her condition, she needed to be airlifted to a second hospital but ultimately succumbed to her injuries prior to undergoing surgery. In the immediate aftermath, Gwinnett homicide detectives went to the apartment where the incident occurred and questioned both Stevens and Gonzalez about the events that had transpired. It was determined that the women had targeted Bocanegra due to her romantic involvement with Gonzalez's brother, who was also allegedly in a relationship with Stevens at the time. The latter was jealous of the man's ties to Bocanegra, with whom he reportedly shared a son. Both suspects were arrested and charged with aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. The victim was described as a New York City native who'd relocated to Georgia for a better life for herself and her son. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to help pay for the costs associated with bringing Bocanegra's body back to her home state of New York. Number 2. Texas campsite killings. Texas couple Thomas Camp and Hannah Johnson took their children as well as Hannah's parents, Carl and Cynthia, on a weekend camping trip at their recently purchased property in Tennessee Colony on November the 14th of 2015. At some point, their vehicle got stuck in the mud. The car was eventually freed, however, by a man on a tractor who happened upon the family in need and sprung into action. The purported Good Samaritan was later identified as 33-year-old William Mitchell Hudson. The latter subsequently shared alcoholic beverages with the family at their campsite before the situation took a sudden dark turn. Hudson accompanied some of the family members into the woods, which was when Cynthia reported hearing multiple gunshots. The only one who emerged from the woods was Hudson, who chased Hannah and Carl into their camper trailer. In a subsequent statement to law enforcement, Cynthia claimed to have witnessed Hudson gun her husband down on the steps of the trailer after fatally shooting her daughter. Cynthia remained hidden for several hours until she felt it was safe to come out, at which point she called the police. The following morning, officers went to Hudson's residence, where they found his blood-stained tractor. A standoff ensued when the man refused to come outside, but he eventually relented and surrendered to the police. He was taken into custody on murder charges, with his bond set at a reported $2.5 million. Cynthia was taken to the hospital, where she was found to be in stable physical condition. In the aftermath, details began to emerge regarding a potential motive for the killings. Hudson's father had sold the property where the incident took place to Thomas Camp. The sale reportedly angered Hudson, who was further inflamed by Camp's decision to chain lock the property's front gate, making it private land. Hudson thus broke onto the property and murdered Camp's family in retaliation for what he perceived to be a series of personal slights. In November of 2017, the man was convicted of 3 counts of capital murder and was consequently sentenced to death by lethal injection. Number 1. Deserae Turner. When Utah teen Deserae Turner didn't return home after school on February the 16th of 2017, her parents reported her missing to the authorities, setting a massive search effort into motion. At around midnight, 2 of Turner's friends tracked her down using her cell phone's location information. She was found lying lifelessly in a dry canal in Smithfield, suffering from an apparent gunshot wound to the head. Upon being rushed to the hospital, Turner was placed in a medically induced coma. Although she did ultimately survive, she was left with partial blindness, as well as paralysis and weakness on her left side as a result of the shooting. Investigators determined that the crime had been committed by 16-year-old Coulter Peterson, along with another teenage boy named as Jason Decker. Official reports on the matter identified the 2 perpetrators as Turner's classmates at Green Canyon High School, while Peterson was further described as a friend of the girls. According to the Salt Lake Tribune, on the night of the incident, Peterson was complaining to Decker about how often Turner would send him messages on Snapchat. The suggestion was subsequently made that Peterson simply kill the girl to eliminate his problem altogether, at which point he and Decker devised a plot to lure Turner to the canal under the false pretense of selling her a knife. When she arrived, Decker pretended to be looking for a missing ring on the ground. Meanwhile, Peterson brandished a firearm and shot Turner in the back of the head while she was distracted. The teen boys then abandoned her to die, making off with some of her valuables, including cash and an iPod. As a result of the ensuing police investigation, both Peterson and Decker were arrested on charges of attempted aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, as well as 4 counts of obstruction of justice. During Peterson's sentencing hearing in 2018, Turner addressed her former friend directly, saying, "I hate you. I hate what you did to me. I hate that I trusted you. Your life shall be confined to a small room, and my life will also be confined." Both defendants were ultimately sentenced to prison terms of 15 years to life. Thanks for watching. Would you rather go on a date with someone who asks to meet up in an isolated, dimly lit area, or drive 3 hours to a concert only to find out that it's been cancelled? Let us know in the comments section below.